Chapter 4, Section 6, Freedom versus Security. An essential question that courts must consider when dealing with individual liberty claims is the question of public safety. Here again, courts use a balancing test to decide where to draw the line between absolute individual liberty and complete identification with the interests of the state. As a concept, public safety is elastic, and it changes depending on the era in question. The protections in the First Amendment are relevant to public safety and government interests in a number of ways, and are especially sensitive to political concerns, both domestic and international. This political sensitivity can be seen in early limitations on the freedom of speech during wartime, such as in Schenck. In times of war or domestic disturbance, the Supreme Court has been quicker to constrain individual speech rights in favor of a government interest. That calculus can change depending on the nature of the conflict, as was evident in Tinker. The Second Amendment is more responsive to domestic politics and has obvious implications for public safety and public health. The debate over Second Amendment rights has centered on the types of controls government can place on individual gun ownership. Some argue that government should be able to restrictly control gun ownership because it is a serious public health issue. Others argue that the government should prioritize individual liberty, having a constitutional duty to ensure access to rights but not attempt to create positive outcomes. This mirrors the tension between positive and negative conceptions of liberty, in terms of what the government must or must not do to protect individual rights. The tension between liberty and security is active in discussions about the Fourth Amendment as well. Government surveillance is nothing new, especially at the federal level. The government often spied on domestic opponents of the FBI or other people whom the government saw as a threat, notably in the COINTELPRO program, wherein the FBI worked to surveil and discredit leaders in the civil rights and feminist movements, among others. A contemporary example is the mass surveillance program run by the National Security Agency, NSA, and disclosed by Edward Snowden in 2013. These programs were notable in that they captured communications by American citizens. In addition to building profiles of metadata, the relevant information about communications without the content itself, such as who sent the communications, to whom they were sent, and what platform was used. Reading communications without a warrant is prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. The government justified the existence of the programs in various ways, claiming they were limited, necessary for national security, and controlled by internal safeguards. Critics have pointed out that the review function of the judiciary cannot be completed when the checks on executive power are controlled by the executive itself. This type of surveillance is a good example of the tension between civil liberties and public safety. Supporters of government surveillance program point to the threat of terrorism and argue that the government must do whatever is necessary to protect American citizens. Opponents point to the long American tradition of individual rights, which have been more or less upheld even when the nation has been at war. The Supreme Court has declined to rule on the constitutionality of these programs, and the debate is still ongoing. Another area of debate is around the treatment of prisoners and what precisely the Constitution means by prohibiting cruel and unusual punishment in the Eighth Amendment. The most active area of disagreement has been capital punishment, the death penalty, though there are also substantive disagreements about our system of incarceration and what goals it serves, particularly whether the United States should have a punitive system or a rehabilitative system. Accordingly, some political groups and candidates run tough on crime and focus on punishing people who commit crimes, while others focus on the broader conditions that led to the crime. Capital punishment is inherently irreversible, which raises significant due process questions. If a state mistakenly executes an innocent person, that person cannot be made whole again. The Supreme Court in Gregg v. Georgia, 1975, the case that restarted capital punishment in the mid-1970s, noted societal approval for capital punishment as a justification. Since Gregg, the court has upheld several restrictions on capital punishment, including banning capital punishment for crimes committed by minors, the mentally handicapped, and for rape and crimes other than murder. The political argument for capital punishment and for a punitive system of justice generally weighs the safety of the community greater than the rights of any one individual.